In this video, I want to give you an overview of Rowy, a low-code backend for your Firebase and Google Cloud. So I've signed up for a new account here, and the first thing you got to do is create a workspace, and that's just going to create a place for all of your projects, for all your collections, your databases. Okay, so let's create a workspace and give it a name. I'm going to be a developer. Next. Size of your team, just me. I'm going to use it for a low-code backend, and we're good. Okay, so here's our workspace, and here's where we'll put all of our projects. So let's create a new project, and this is going to be products, and we're going to use Firebase, but you can see Postgres and Mongo are coming. And here we got to give Rowy access to our Firebase. If you don't have a Firebase project set up, that's fine. It can do it right now. Here we're just giving permissions to Rowy, and that's all good. Great, continue. Now, if you already have a Firebase project and you just want to import it into Rowy, you can do that or create a new project. The projects you already have are going to be here, but we're just going to create a new one. Let's just call this products and select the region closest to you. Normally it defaults to the proper one anyways, and create a project. So that didn't work. And it didn't work because this is the first time I'm creating a project in Firebase with this email. And the first time you use the email, you have to accept the terms and conditions of Firebase. So open Firebase console and create a new project. Once again, we're going to call it products and accept the Firebase terms. If you want Google Analytics tied to your project, you can do this here. I'm not. Now my project's ready. Great. Now let's go back to Rowy, and from the drop-down menu, we can select our project. From here on out, if you have any new projects that you want to create from Rowy, you don't have to go over to the Firebase console. Okay, great. Here we're setting up the region for our Firestore, that's our database, and our storage for any files we need stored. Normally it should default to where you are, and that's where I am, and so I'm going to enable those services, and it'll just take a minute. While that's going on, we can enable Firebase authentication. What this is going to do is it's going to allow you to control different users and what permissions they have on your database. So for instance, if you only wanted certain users to be able to change certain types of data in your database. So we're going to open our auth page, get started, and that should be good. Let's verify, and auth is set up. Awesome, we're all ready to go. Okay, so we've created our workspace in Rowy, we've created a project in Firebase, we've linked up Rowy to Firebase, and now it's time to make a table. And here, we've got a bunch of example tables that you can look at, but we want to start from square one. So let's just create an empty table. Here we just want our primary collection, that's good, and we're going to name this clothing. Great. Here's the user-facing name, like what people will see in Rowy. And this is the table ID that you'll use to reference it if you do any custom coding, and that's fine. If you want a section in Rowy, that's just how it visually organizes it in your workspace. You can set up a bunch of different sections in Rowy to just organize your projects. We're not going to do any right now, so let's just move on. Access controls, we're just going to accept all the defaults at this point, but if you had different types of users with different permissions, you would set that up here. Auditing is how you track what users are doing. So it's going to record all the actions of users. So if someone updates a record, it will tell you who updated it and when. This is automatically enabled, and we're just going to keep it like that. And then finally, you can initialize some standard columns, but let's just start out with a blank slate. Beautiful. So here is our first table. Of course, there's no data, there's no fields, there's no columns, there's no nothing. So we got two options. One is we can import data. So we can drop in a CSV or a TSV. We can link up an Airtable account and import your data from Airtable. You can paste in some CSV data. So if you're just in like Google Sheets or an Excel, you can just highlight it and paste it in. Or if you've got a CSV at a URL, you can paste it in here too. But let's go bare bones and just make our own. So let's start off and just add a column. Let's call our first column size. Then down here is where we get into the real magic, field types. And in Rowy, there's over 30 different field types. That is, what kind of data, what kinds of things are they that we're putting into each cell, each record. So let's just start out with our short text so we can get a picture of how it looks here. So that sounds great, and add it. And there we go. We've got our first field. Now, of course, this is just like the header, right? It's just telling us the name of it, but we don't actually have any data. And so let's add some data, and we're going to add a row. So we added a row. There's nothing in there now, but we click it, and when we click our first row here, we can see the sidebar kind of pop up. And when you open it up, we can see that we get all the information about this record. And when I say record, a record is each entry, each row of data in this table. Right now, we don't really have any columns other than this first one, so there's not a lot in here, but we'll see as we populate it, we can see more. And we can set a size in here, so let's just call it small. That's great. And down here, we just have a document path. And if we click this, this will bring us to that record in Firebase. We're not going to go there yet, but that's what this thing is. Okay, great. So we're just going to click out to accept it. And there we go. We've got our first record, our first piece of data in our database. That's pretty cool. But maybe as we're setting up our database, called modeling your data, maybe realize, oh, you know what? This shouldn't be a short text. We actually want to constrain the user to only a few options. Well, you can come up here to our options, and you can see all the options you have for your column. And we can come down here, and we can edit the type of our field and change it to a single select. Now, we're getting a nice caution here because Rowy is telling us, hey, you're changing this type and you've already added some data in here, so you might lose some data, just FYI. Well, we don't really have anything in here, so that's fine. And you can see now that we've got a nice select menu, a drop-down menu. Let's clear this out. And we don't have any options in there yet, so let's add some options. So we can come up here, go to our column config, and this will give us the options for whatever field type we selected. Because every field type is fundamentally different, so there are going to be different configurations, different options that we can change with it. And here is where you will spend a lot of your time configuring the options of each field type. Now, in this field type, there's going to be things that are particular to this field type. So for this one is a select menu, but there's also going to be things that are universal to all field types. And that's these first two options right here. This is going to be the default value type. So that is to say, when nothing is set in there, when nothing is put in, what is it going to be? And you can have undefined, null, set a static type here, or dynamic that we'll look at later. Okay, we're just going to leave it undefined. And here, if you want this to be required, you can select it here. That is, the user won't be able to create a new record, that is, create a new row, unless they fill this out. If this is left unchecked, they can just leave it blank and set other fields. Okay, cool. So down here, let's set our options, and let's say small, medium, and large. If we want to give the users ability to add custom options, we can do that, but let's just add it there. This is Rowy just telling us we need to redeploy our table's cloud functions. That's great. It'll just take a second. Okay, so now let's select a different size, medium, and there we go. All right, let's look at some of these other fields. So we come in here and let's grab long text. We obviously know what that is, but I want to show you something if you're running out of space. So we're going to call this sentences and add our column. And maybe you have the first few sentences of Moby Dick copied. Oh yes, wonderful. And so you accept that and you can't see it. Well, if you come up here, we can change our row height. Let's make it double as large about. And then we could pull out the width of our column to be able to see all of our Moby Dick. Beautiful. So now we've got a medium-sized shirt with a few sentences from Moby Dick. Just a beautiful database. Okay, let's look at a few more field types. So you got email, phone, URL. Those are all self-explanatory. You can have rich text. So you would use these for things like blog posts. And let's double click in there. And you can see we have a nice rich text editor where we can style things. This is a snazzy shirt. Yes, it is. And we're going to say snazzy's in bold and italic. That's great. And of course, if you want to see the HTML, you can come in here and we got an editor and we can see what it's actually saving. Now, if you have any experience in Firebase, you may be wondering, wait, HTML or rich text is not a data type in Firebase, so what's going on? Well, let's take a look in our Firebase so we can see what our data actually looks like, because then we're going to see the power of Rowy. Okay, so if you just click down here, we can go to our Firebase. And we have one record. Here's our clothing collection. And when we come in here, we can see when we scroll to the bottom, these right here are those auditing fields we originally accepted as default when we were setting up the table. And it was created by me with some other data about when it happened, updated. But down here, we can see the fields from our first record. So here we have our size, and we can see that it's of type string. Over here, we also have string, and here we also have a string. That's right. Because what Rowy is doing is it's adding features on top of your Cloud Firestore. So while Firestore only has 8 field types, Rowy has over 30. Okay, great. So let's go back into our Rowy and look at a few other fields. Add column, and we've seen all those. So let's go down to these numeric ones. Numbers, that's obvious. You can add toggles or booleans, so these can be true or false values. So maybe we have a shipping, and we can toggle it on or off. You can add ratings. Let's just call it rating. That's clear. You can tell us the number of stars. Let's just say 3, and star fractions. That is, can you select half of a star? Let's just say we can do half, and then we get these. So maybe this medium shirt gets a 1.5 star. Let's scroll over, add another column. We've got sliders, color pickers, geo points. This is pretty cool. Location. We can add in latitude and longitude. Color picker allows us to add color in a bunch of different formats. So we got hex, RGB, and HSV. That's great. We've got date and times that give us real nice UI widgets. And one thing to note here is the column name is the name that will be displayed in Rowy, whereas the field key will be what is used if you're doing any custom coding. So you can make this look more readable. So date, time, like that. And the field key defaults to a more programming friendly syntax. But you can always go and change this as well. These aren't bound. So we get this beautiful UI. We can set the date and then the time and minutes. That's awesome. And along with that, we can also have a duration, which allows us to set a start and stop time, and it will auto-compute the duration, which is what it will actually return. Awesome. We can store images, and these are going to be added to our Firebase storage, and Rowy supports all of these image formats, including next generation image formats like WebP and AVIF. And the nice thing about the image field is that we get a preview in line. So let's just add an image, some banana clothing, and we can see that in line, or file format, and this supports any file type. Cool. So those are the basic field types in Rowy. But that's just scratching the surface, because the real power of Rowy comes with the last field types. So check this out. Let's add a column, and if we scroll down, we see these connection field types. And these are super powerful. First, the connector. And I like to think about the connector like our options, our select list, where you click to open a menu to select options, but dynamic. So let's call this dynamic options. And you can see this connects to any table or API to fetch a list of results based on the query to fetch a list of results. Okay, what does that mean? Well, let me show you. So here we've got our standard results. What's the default value type and if it's required. But here is where the real magic is. In these last field types and features in Rowy I'm going to show you, we're going to start seeing some custom code. And this custom code is just JavaScript. Well, it's TypeScript, but of course, TypeScript is just a superset. It's just JavaScript with some more features. So you can just write JavaScript anywhere if you don't know TypeScript. But it's not too hard to understand, and we'll have other videos explaining each of these field types in depth. But remember, these are just dynamic options. So you can see here, we've just got a function that's accepting these 3 parameters, and it's returning an array. Of course, an array of options. But the real power of this is that we can generate our options from other places. Maybe we're calling a different service, maybe a fruits API, and we can get all of the fruit options here. Or maybe we're referencing another table, and so we can pull our options from there. I'm just going to fill this out because this isn't a tutorial on, I'm just going to paste some information here because we're going to have another video on this later. Awesome. So now when you pull this down, it's not working. And that's because in order to use some advanced features in Rowy, we have to set up Rowy Run. And Rowy Run is just a Cloud Run instance that gives us backend functionality like action scripts, user management, and cloud function deployment. Okay, so let's set up Rowy Run. We have to enable billing on Firebase console. You most likely won't get charged because there's huge free quotas before you get to any actual billing. And then after you're done, verify. So go into your Firebase console, down here to upgrade, and you want to upgrade to Blaze. It'll bring you over to Cloud Console if you haven't set up a Google Cloud account before. Accept, add in your billing information, and of course, even if you hit those quotas, which you most likely won't, you get $300 in credit. Next up, we've got a reference field. And reference field is simply a reference to a record. And the way you use this is you just copy a path to a document record. So if you see down here, this is the current document path right here, clothing/ze. And if you click here, it'll bring you to your Firebase console so you can see that document. And so we could actually just store a reference to this same document right here, and that would work. Great. Next, we've got a field that allows us to connect to a different table. That's down here, and it's connect table. Now what this allows us to do is to connect to another table that we have. And so I have another table here called toys. And so if I select it and fill out these other options that we'll go into in another video, you can reference data in another table. This also requires some additional minimal setup here. We're not going to cancel out because we're just introducing this. Next, we got 3 code fields. And first up, we've got JSON. So down here, you can see we have the JSON field, code, and markdown. And these are pretty self-explanatory, but they come with some nice additional features. So if we open up here, we can see that we have syntax highlighting here, and we can come in, we can add items, or we can see the sort of raw JSON right here. So if we just added in a property here, and then went back to our tree, we can see we get all this nice syntax highlighting, and we can copy it to our clipboard, we can edit it, or delete it. We also have simple code with some more additional features. That is, we have code completion with document and a window and everything that comes along with that. Finally, in the code section, we've got Markdown with a great editor that we can see the Markdown on one side and the rendered Markdown on the other. The next 2 field types allow you to run some code either manually or in response to a change in the record. Let me show you. So this first one, action, requires that you just set up roles, so who can run this, what fields are required for this action to run. So if you want to say, oh, I only want to allow this action to run if the name field is filled out, you can set that here. So when the user either clicks it, it'll run immediately. They'll click it and then there'll be a confirmation pop-up. Or if you want parameters, if you want arguments passed in, like in a form, you can click this. And then you can either reference a callable function that you set up in your Firestore Google Cloud project, or just write some JavaScript right here. And finally, you can just customize the button with an emoji if you don't like the defaults, which are right here. So when this action is pressed, so when this button is pressed, the script will run. So let me just show you this in action. So when this is run, this async function will be called, and we're just going to return an object here with this right here, where we're just going to get this message.
user updated successfully on example service. Update that. And when we run it, we can see the response here. But maybe you want to run some script automatically, and you can do that with a next field. It's called derivative. And here you set which fields you want it to listen to. That is, when these fields, whatever you select, are changed, then this script will run. Then you set up here, what kind of output do you want to set? So do you want it to return a short text? Do you want it to return a number? So let's just return a short text for the example. And we're going to listen to changes on our action because we just set that up. Here's our function that'll run. And we are just going to return a hello world. You can set up some validation or character limits, but that's fine for now. This is using a cloud function in the backend, so we just have to redeploy that. Great. So let's run our action because remember, it's listening to this field. And there we go. We see our hello world. Next, we've got our status field that's used for checking the conditions of another field and then setting a status. You can add a condition here. It could be a string. We could say first or second, and then we can select from those statuses. And finally, next we've got our auditing fields that keep track of when either users create or update fields or when just they are created without reference to a user, and then metadata about the user and ID of the record. So that's all the fields, but there's a few amazing things that we haven't covered. First is webhooks. You can create webhooks right here, and you can create a basic webhook. And if you don't know what a webhook is a way for you to be able to interact with your Rowy database really easily. It's kind of like an API without a lot of the setup or rigmarole. So you'll get a URL. And so here, let's set up a basic one, just a basic webhook. That sounds good. And here is your webhook. Here's the URL. And so you can use this in tons of different ways. Most common one would be form submissions, but you can use it for sending other types of data. So maybe you want to count clicks on a button. You could do that. So you just copy this URL. And if you want to set up conditions for when to actually process it, for instance, if you only want to allow webhooks from certain URLs from certain websites, you can set that up here. And then after you receive the webhook with its payload, with its data, its information that comes with it, you can parse it in any way that you want. Maybe you want to keep some data. Maybe you want to transform some data. That's what you do up here. Okay, but we also have other types of common webhook configurations from major services like Typeform for forms, or SendGrid for your email marketing service, or a vanilla web form. And finally, we have extensions. These are pre-made integrations that make it super easy to work with these services like Slack, Algolia, Twilio for SMS communication, or simple API calls. So you can set up a task, tell Rowy when you want this task to trigger, whether it's when you create something, update it, or delete it, if there are any required fields for this to run, conditions, and then finally, you've got what you actually want the task to do. So this would be the highest and most powerful customization you can do. We saw in fields like the derivative that you can run custom code, but here you have ultimate flexibility to do anything you want on your database. Finally, if you need to import or export data, we've got easy options here in many different data formats. We hope you enjoy Rowy, and feel free to drop us a question in the comments below, and we'd love to help you out. We can't wait to see what you build with Rowy.